That night, before the ribeye even hit the table, my parents raised their glasses with an announcement. "Everything goes to your sister. You should probably find a job." As laughter rippled through the private dining room, the restaurant manager slipped me a sealed envelope. Inside wasn't money, it was power. When I stood up, every fork froze mid-air, and the copper-tinted lights seemed to dim around my family's suddenly pale faces. They'd given away an empire they no longer controlled. My name is Natalie Pierce, and I grew up in the shadow of my sister's spotlight in a gray stone mansion in Lakefield, that pristine suburb north of Chicago where even the mailboxes have architectural pedigree. In every family photo lining our marble foyer, Ivy commanded center stage, her blonde hair catching light like spun gold while I hovered at the edges, dark-haired and perpetually out of focus. The arrangement wasn't accidental. My mother, Vivian, orchestrated our lives like a symphony where Ivy played first violin and I was relegated to turning pages. Our father, Gregory Pierce, built Pierce and Alder Developments from a single strip mall into a commercial real estate empire spanning 3 states. He'd arrive home at 9:30 each night, bourbon already poured by our housekeeper, and ask Ivy about her day at Northwestern's business school while I got a perfunctory nod. "Natalie's practical," he'd tell his golf buddies, the word practical dropping like a stone. But Ivy, she sparkles. At 32, I'd learned to translate their language. Practical meant forgettable. Sparkles meant worthy of the Pierce name. The distinction had been carved into my bones since childhood, when my struggle with numbers got dismissed as laziness while Ivy's every achievement got framed in gold. They never bothered with testing or tutors for me. Why invest in the spare when you have the air? I worked contract positions for the city procurement office, analyzing vendor submissions and tracking purchase orders, the kind of invisible work that kept municipalities running but never made headlines. My parents told their friends I was between opportunities, as if my entire career was just a prolonged intermission before I found a suitable husband and disappeared into suburban motherhood like a good second daughter should. But numbers tell stories if you know how to listen, not through formulas or calculations that swam before my eyes, but through patterns that emerged like music from noise. Where others saw spreadsheets, I saw rhythms and repetitions, anomalies that pulsed like wrong notes in a familiar song. In my cramped cubicle downtown, I'd started noticing something strange in the city's construction contracts, satellite contractors with different names but identical billing patterns, addresses that traced back to P.O. boxes in strip malls, invoices that climbed in perfect increments like someone playing scales. 3 of those contractors had submitted bids for the new municipal parking structure. All 3 listed different principals, different tax IDs, different references, but their paperwork bore the same watermark anomaly, the same slight kerning issue in their letterhead fonts, details anyone else would miss. But my brain had learned to compensate for its scrambled numbers by becoming a pattern recognition machine. The connecting thread appeared in a footer on page 47 of one contractor's capability statement, prepared in conjunction with Pierce and Alder Development Consultants, my family's company, offering consultation services I'd never heard them mention. I photocopied everything, stuffing the papers into a banker's box I kept under my desk. Not because I had a plan, I didn't. Not then, but because I'd learned that information was the only currency that mattered when you're born into a family that's already decided you're worthless. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment in Rogers Park, eating takeout pad thai while spreading the documents across my floor like tarot cards. Each invoice, each bid, each mysteriously similar submission formed a constellation of connections that led back to one truth. Pierce and Alder wasn't just developing properties, they were developing an entire ecosystem of financial manipulation, and the city my employer was paying for it. The real value, I realized, wasn't in the properties or the Pierce name or even Ivy's MBA. It was in the leverage you built when no one was watching, when they'd written you off as the practical one who'd never amount to anything worth noticing. As I organized my findings into color-coded folders, I thought about all those family dinners where they'd discussed succession planning like I wasn't even there, invisible at my own table. They were right about one thing: I was practical. Practical enough to know that revenge is a dish best served with documentation. The first time I realized I was different, I was 14 and failing algebra while Ivy breezed through calculus 2 years ahead of schedule. Mrs. Hoffman kept me after class, tapping equations on the board that might as well have been hieroglyphics. "You're not trying, Natalie," she said, while the numbers swam and rearranged themselves like living things refusing to be pinned down. At home that night, my mother's solution was hiring Ivy to tutor me, my 16-year-old sister explaining basic concepts while texting her boyfriend, sighing dramatically every time I asked her to repeat something. What nobody knew was that I'd already developed my own system. While numbers betrayed me, patterns never did. I kept notebooks filled with symbols. I'd invented triangles for recurring expenses, spirals for variables, colored dots tracking frequencies and relationships. My teachers called it doodling. My parents called it proof I'd never amount to much. But those symbols let me see what others missed: the rhythm beneath the chaos, the repetitions that revealed themselves like a photograph developing in solution. The undiagnosed dyscalculia wasn't my only secret. Auditory processing issues meant conversations reached me on delay, words scrambling mid-flight before reassembling in my brain. In family discussions about Pearson Alder's expansion, I'd appear slow, always a beat behind, while Ivy jumped in with quick insights. "Natalie's sweet," my mother would tell her book club friends. But Ivy got the business gene. They never noticed I was taking notes in my symbol system, tracking every deal, every partnership, every financial move my father mentioned. My 16th birthday exemplified our family dynamics perfectly. My mother had promised a small celebration, just family, maybe dinner at that Italian place I loved. But 2 weeks before, Ivy got engaged to Harrison Whitfield III, heir to a logistics fortune. My birthday dinner became Ivy's engagement party. 200 guests in our ballroom, a cake with her initials, my father toasting the merger of two great families while I sat at the children's table with our younger cousins. My mother found me later, crying in the pool house. "You need to be realistic, sweetie," she said, smoothing my hair with manicured fingers. "Some of us are meant to shine, others are meant to be supportive." That word, realistic, became my father's favorite descriptor for me. "Natalie's realistic about her limitations." "Natalie's taken a realistic job at the city." Realistically, Natalie will find her place eventually. Each repetition carved away another piece of what I might have been, until I learned to make myself small enough to fit the space they'd allocated. But trauma and neglect can be excellent teachers. While Ivy learned spreadsheets and valuations at Northwestern, I learned to read the stories between the lines. My symbol notebooks evolved into complex mapping systems, tracking connections others couldn't see. At the procurement office, my colleagues thought I worked slowly, meticulously checking every document. They didn't realize I was building a mental database of every contractor, every pattern, every anomaly that flickered across my desk. The city's consulting contracts with firms like Brennan Associates and Clearwater Holdings showed identical expense patterns, peaks and valleys that matched like fingerprints. When I mapped them in my notebooks, they formed a web with Pierce and Alder at the center, hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies and consulting fees. My father had built something more sophisticated than a real estate empire. He'd built a machine for extracting public money through perfectly legal channels that were perfectly corrupt. During Sunday dinners, while Ivy and Harrison discussed their wedding plans and my parents debated which properties to leave her, I watched them all with new eyes. They saw the dutiful, dull daughter who'd never quite launched, still single at 32, still renting, still struggling with basic math. They didn't see the woman who'd spent a decade learning to decode their language, who'd turned her disabilities into a different kind of sight. "You should be more like your sister," my father said one evening, Ivy's engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. "She understands what it takes to build something lasting." I nodded, eyes down, the practical daughter accepting her place. In my apartment that night, I stared at my notebooks, at the patterns I'd tracked, at the evidence I'd gathered without even meaning to. My father was right. I did need to be more like Ivy. I needed to build something. But what I'd build wouldn't be a marriage or a conventional career. It would be a trap, constructed from their own assumptions, invisible until it was too late to escape. The revelation came at 3:45 on a Tuesday afternoon when I discovered invoice duplicates across 17 different contractors, all billing for consultation services at exactly 8% above material costs. The pattern was so elegant I almost admired it until I realized the city had paid out $4.7 million in these phantom fees over 18 months. I needed help, but not the kind that came with mandatory reporting requirements. Marla Keene found me first. She was reviewing contract disputes for the city when she noticed me photographing documents after hours. "Either you're committing espionage or you've found something interesting," she said, her voice sharp as her tailored suit. I showed her 3 patterns. She whistled low and pulled out a business card for her private practice. "Whatever you're building, you'll need legal architecture. Call me when you're ready to stop taking pictures and start taking action." 2 weeks later, I met Dion Harris at a data governance seminar the city forced us to attend. While everyone else dozed through PowerPoints about compliance, Dion was writing code on his laptop, building what looked like a neural network. During the break, I sketched my pattern recognition system on a napkin triangles connecting to spirals, color-coded clusters representing vendor relationships. "This is insane," he said. Then, grinning, "I mean that as a compliment. You're doing machine learning in analog." We met at a diner in Uptown where nobody from Pierce and Alder's circles would venture. Over coffee and pie, I explained what I'd found. Dion's fingers flew across his keyboard, translating my symbols into algorithms. "We could build something that catches this automatically," he said. "Not just your father's network, but any procurement fraud following similar patterns." "It needs to be anonymous," I said, completely separated from me. Marla, who joined us an hour in, pulled out incorporation documents. "I've been waiting for someone to weaponize procurement data. We'll use a Delaware LLC, Nested Holdings, anonymous registration. What do you want to call it?" I thought about Cinderella, another forgotten daughter who'd turned servants' knowledge into power. But this wasn't a fairy tale. "Cinderline Analytics," I said, like finding the line that connects the cinders. We incorporated under N.K. Rowan, my middle initials and my grandmother's maiden name, a woman my family never spoke about because she'd divorced my grandfather and taken half his fortune in 1973. Marla handled the legal structure, Dion built the algorithm foundation, and I provided the patterns, translating years of symbolic note-taking into training data for our machine learning model. Our first breakthrough came when Dion's algorithm detected a round tripping scheme where Pierce and Alder was billing the city for subcontractor work, then hiring their own shell companies as those subcontractors, effectively charging twice for the same service. The beautiful part was that our tool could identify this pattern across any dataset, not just my father's contracts. We pitched our software to 3 insurance companies investigating construction fraud. 2 said no. The third, Midwest Fidelity, offered us a pilot program worth $200,000. "Your algorithm caught patterns our entire fraud department missed," their VP told us. "How long have you been developing this?" "My whole life," I said, which was truer than he knew. By night, I refined our detection models using Pierce and Alder's contracts as test cases. By day, I continued my mundane job at procurement, invisible Natalie Pierce filing papers while Cinderline Analytics gained momentum in markets my family didn't even know existed. We hired 2 developers, then 3 more. Dion insisted on equity over salary. Marla structured our cap table to maintain my anonymous control. The strangest part was sitting through family dinners while harboring this secret expansion. Ivy would discuss her wedding seating charts while Harrison name-dropped connections at Goldman Sachs. My mother would suggest I try online dating before it's too late. My father would mention new city contracts Pierce and Alder had secured, never knowing I'd already flagged them in our system. "Maybe you could work for Ivy after the wedding," my mother suggested one evening. "She'll need an assistant when she takes over Pierce and Alder." "That's a thought," I replied, cutting my chicken into precise pieces. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with an email from Hartwell Equity, requesting a meeting about Series A funding. 6 months after incorporation, Cinderline Analytics had 43 municipal and insurance clients across the Midwest. Our algorithms had identified over 12 million in fraudulent billing. We operated from a co-working space in the Loop, our team knowing me only as NK, the mysterious founder who attended meetings via video with the camera off. The double life was exhausting but necessary. Every pattern we detected, every fraudulent scheme we unveiled, added another piece to the puzzle I was assembling. Pierce and Alder wasn't just vulnerable, they were catastrophically exposed. Their entire business model depended on nobody looking too closely at the connections. I was building more than a company. I was building a weapon powerful enough to destroy an empire, disguised as a tool for protecting others from exactly the kind of damage my family had perfected. The Hartwell Equity partner looked like money incarnate silver-haired Swiss watch, the kind of tan that came from sailing off Martha's Vineyard. Your algorithm flagged $8 million in fraud for Great Lakes Insurance last quarter, he said, sliding a term sheet across the conference table. We want to take Cinderline national, 12 million Series A, but we need to meet the founder. I sat silent for 10 seconds, Marla's hand steady on my shoulder. Kay, values privacy, she said smoothly. Surely you understand the sensitive nature of fraud detection? We're talking about a $40 million valuation, he countered. We need to know who we're investing in. That evening, I studied Pierce and Alder's latest SEC filings in my apartment, cross-referencing them with Westridge Bank's public disclosures. My father had leveraged everything for a massive mixed-use development in Schaumburg, $800 million in construction loans with aggressive covenants. The debt service coverage ratio had to stay above 1.2. The EBITDA couldn't drop below $50 million annually. Any material adverse change in business operations would trigger immediate default. Marla called at 11:15. I've been thinking about your father's loans. If someone acquired that debt during a covenant breach, they'd essentially own Pierce and Alder. Hypothetically, I said, watching rain streak my windows. Hypothetically, if that someone had evidence of systematic procurement fraud, they could prove material adverse change. The bank would have to act. The next morning, I met with Westridge's distressed debt team, presenting myself as a representative of Rowan Capital, another anonymous entity Marla had structured. We're interested in acquisition opportunities in commercial real estate debt, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The associate barely looked up from his phone. Pierce and Alder's performing well, not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, I replied. We'd like an assignment option if their covenants breach. We'll pay 50 basis points for the right of first refusal. He laughed. You think Gregory Pierce is going to default his daughters marrying Harrison Whitfield? They're untouchable. Then you're getting free money, I said, sliding over a cashier's check for $250,000. 50 basis points for an option that'll never trigger. Easy decision. Greed won over skepticism. Within a week, I had signed documents giving Rowan Capital the right to acquire Pierce and Alder's debt if specific covenants breached. The papers sat in my safe deposit box like a loaded weapon waiting for the perfect moment. Meanwhile, Cinderline's algorithm had evolved into something beautiful and terrible. Dion's latest update could trace shell company networks through the faintest digital fingerprints shared IP addresses, recycled phone numbers, duplicate routing numbers appearing across supposedly unrelated entities. When we ran it on Pierce and Alder's ecosystem, the results made my stomach drop. Harrison Whitfield, my sister's fiancé, owned 7 of the shell companies billing Pierce and Alder for consulting services. The invoices matched down to the penny with construction overruns on city projects. It was a perfect circle inflate costs, bill the city, kick back the overage through consulting fees to Harrison's shells, then funnel it back to Pierce and Alder as investment capital from the Whitfield family. This is RICO territory, Marla said when I showed her the analysis. Federal investigation, asset forfeiture, the works. Or leverage, I replied. The insurance company contracts kept rolling in. A health insurer in Michigan wanted our algorithm to detect Medicare billing fraud. Two car insurance companies signed annual contracts worth $3 million combined. Each success added credibility to Cinderline, building a fortress of legitimacy around what was essentially a precision weapon aimed at my family's heart. Hartwell increased their offer to $15 million, but remained insistent on meeting me. Final offer, their partner said. But K. Rowan needs to materialize, or we walk. I scheduled the signing for the same night as my parents' announcement dinner, the one where they'd formally name Ivy as successor. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd spent weeks mapping their plans through overheard calls and glimpses of documents left carelessly on my father's desk during Sunday dinners. They'd reserved the Copper Elms private room, invited 40 of their closest business associates, prepared a presentation about Pierce and Alder's next generation of leadership. Marla drew up the forensic report that would prove covenant breach, 40 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud, supported by Cinderline's algorithm analysis. Every ghost invoice, every shell company, every recycled dollar was documented with the precision of a SWAT team preparing for a raid. "You're about to destroy your family," Dayon said quietly as we reviewed the final documentation. "No," I corrected him. "They destroyed themselves. I'm just the one who kept receipts." The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my window watching the city lights, thinking about the girl who'd cried in the pool house on her 16th birthday, who'd been told to be realistic about her limitations. Tomorrow, I'd show them exactly how realistic I could be. The Pierce Empire was about to discover what happened when you ignored the wrong daughter. The forensic report from Cinderline Analytics was a masterpiece of devastating precision. Page after page detailed the shell company network, each connection illuminated like neurons firing in a corrupt brain. Harrison's companies, Clearfield Consulting, Brennan Associates, Meridian Partners, and 4 others had invoiced Pierce and Alder for $37 million in services over 3 years. Those same companies had identical operating addresses, P.O. boxes in a strip mall my father owned in Naperville. "This is the kill shot," Marla said, reviewing our evidence at her office at 7:30 that morning. "But we need to coordinate the timing perfectly. The bank notice, the forensic report, Hartwell's announcement, everything has to hit simultaneously." I'd arranged for 3 separate approaches. First, the Legal Pathway Westridge Bank would receive our covenant breach notification at exactly 8:15 that evening, during the dinner's main course. The material adverse change clause would trigger immediately upon receipt of evidence showing systematic fraud affecting more than 5% of revenue. Second, the business revelation Jonathan Park from Hartwell had agreed to attend the dinner as Dion's +1, carrying the final Series A documents. He thought he was there to network. He didn't know he'd be witnessing the unveiling of Cinderline's true founder at the precise moment my family's empire crumbled. Third, the human element I'd convinced the Copper Elms manager, Roberto, to act as an unwitting messenger. "My attorney needs these documents delivered to me at exactly 8:20, I told him, handing over a sealed envelope. "It's time-sensitive tax documentation." A white lie that would become truth soon enough. That afternoon, I attended my final day at the procurement office. My supervisor barely noticed when I turned in my resignation, effective immediately. "Finally found something better?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. "Something different," I replied. At 4 o'clock, Dion ran Cinderline's algorithm one last time on the complete Pierce and Alder dataset. The visualization looked like a spider web with Harrison at the center, my father's signature on every strand. The algorithm had also discovered something we'd missed Ivy's name on 3 subsidiary companies that had received marketing consultancy fees totaling $2.3 million. She wasn't just the chosen successor, she was already complicit. "Your sister's been taking money since before her engagement," Dayon said quietly. "This implicates her directly." I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my chest. All those years of being overlooked while Ivy played the golden child, and she'd been stealing alongside her fiancé the entire time. The perfect daughter with the perfect future, built on perfectly documented fraud. Marla's paralegal delivered the assignment notification to Westridge at 5:45, confirming Rowan Capital's intent to exercise its option upon covenant breach. The bank's legal team wouldn't see it until morning, but the timestamp would prove we'd filed before default, giving us priority position. At 6, I stood in my apartment, applying makeup with steady hands. I'd chosen a black dress professional, forgettable, the kind of outfit that would let me blend into the background until the moment I stepped forward. My phone buzzed with confirmations Jonathan Park was en route with the Hartwell documents. The forensic report was loaded on my iPad, backed up to 3 cloud servers. Roberto at the Copper Elm had the envelope. The final piece came from an unexpected source. My grandmother, the one nobody talked about, had been following Cinderline's success through tech industry newsletters. She'd figured out N.K. Rowan's identity and sent a single email. I waited 40 years to see a Pierce woman take what's hers. Don't hesitate. Attached was a document I'd never known existed, the original Pierce and Alder Incorporation papers from 1981, showing my grandmother had retained a dormant class of supervoting shares never exercised, never mentioned, but still legally valid. She'd transferred them to me that morning through Marla's office. "This changes everything," Marla had called, breathless. "With these shares plus the debt assignment, you won't just have leverage, you'll have complete control." I arrived at the Copper Elm at 7:50, watching from the bar as my family's guests assembled in the private room. Pierce and Alder executives, city officials who didn't know they'd been defrauded, Harrison's family radiating old money confidence. My mother air-kissed her way through the crowd while my father held court near the projection screen where he'd soon announce Ivy's ascension. Ivy herself glowed in cream-colored silk, Harrison's hand possessive on her waist. She caught sight of me and waved dismissively, mouthing, "Bars inside," as if I was confused about where to find drinks. I smiled back, thinking of the 40 pages of evidence with her signature, the algorithm tracking every dollar she'd stolen, the FBI field office number Marla had ready on speed dial. At 8 o'clock sharp, my father clinked his glass. "Before we celebrate the future of Pierce and Alder," he began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years building empires, "let's toast to family, to legacy, and to knowing your place in the world." I raised my water glass from the doorway, toasting silently. In 15 minutes, everyone would learn exactly what place I'd chosen for myself. The private dining room at the Copper Elm glowed with calculated warmth, copper fixtures casting golden light on 40 faces that represented the infrastructure of my father's empire. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the family table, where the youngest cousins usually sat, while Ivy commanded the space at my father's right hand, her 4-carat diamond throwing prisms across the white tablecloth. "Tonight marks a transition," my father began, his voice carrying over the clink of wine glasses. "Pierce and Alder has grown from a single property to a portfolio worth $800 million, but every empire needs succession planning." He paused, savoring the moment. "Ivy will assume the role of executive vice president, effective Monday, with full CEO transition within 18 months. Applause rippled through the room. My mother raised her champagne, tears of pride threatening her carefully applied mascara. "Our daughter," she said, "has everything, the education, the breeding, the vision to lead Pierce and Alder into the next generation." And speaking of the next generation, Harrison stood, pulling Ivy to her feet. "We're pleased to announce that the Whitfield Foundation will be investing $20 million in Pierce and Alder's new development, cementing our family's partnership." I watched it all from my exile at the table's edge, invisible as always. The waiter had just served the second-course duck confit with cherry reduction when my mother finally acknowledged my presence. "Natalie," she called out, her voice carrying that false brightness she used when performing kindness for an audience. "Don't look so glum. I'm sure Ivy will find something for you at the company. Perhaps in filing you've always been so thorough with paperwork." Laughter scattered across the room. Ivy smiled with practiced sympathy. Actually, Mother. I was thinking reception. Natalie has such a pleasant phone voice. How generous, I murmured, cutting my duck into precise squares. My father stood again, PowerPoint clicking to life behind him. Architectural renderings filled the screen glass towers, retail complexes, the future of Pierce and Alder mapped in steel and concrete. With the Schaumburg development breaking ground next month, he said, we're positioned to dominate commercial real estate across the northern suburbs. The financing is secured, the permits approved, the contractors ready. Speaking of contractors, Harrison interjected, wine making him bold. My consulting firms have identified 12% efficiency improvements in the construction pipeline. That's $4 million in savings this year alone. I glanced at my phone. 8:14. 1 minute. Natalie. My father's voice cut through my thoughts. Since you're here, might as well make yourself useful. Tell everyone about your little job at the city. What is it you do again? File permits, procurement analysis, I said quietly. She reviews purchase orders. Ivy translated for the room, her tone suggesting this was barely a step above food service. It's actually perfect for her skill set. Very routine. Well, my mother sighed theatrically. We can't all be stars. Natalie, sweetie, I actually have the number for a friend whose daughter runs a placement agency. They specialize in finding positions for people who are between opportunities. I'll give it to you after dinner. 8:15. I heard the soft chime of email notifications from several phones around the room. The Westridge Bank legal team had just received our covenant breach notice. You know, I said, my voice steady, I should probably find something more substantial. The city job ends today. Finally, my father muttered. 32 years old and still drifting. Ivy had her MBA by 24. Different paths, I replied. Roberto appeared at the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He walked over with measured steps, the envelope in his hand like a summons. Ms. Pierce. This was marked for 8:20 delivery. Thank you, I said, accepting the envelope as conversation resumed around us. The copper lights seemed brighter suddenly, or maybe that was just my perception sharpening as I stood. Sit down, Natalie, my mother hissed. We're in the middle of dinner. Actually, I said, breaking the seal on the envelope. I think everyone will want to hear this. I pulled out 3 documents, the Westridge assignment confirmation, the forensic report summary, and Hartwell's term sheet with my name clearly visible as founder and CEO of Cinderline Analytics. The room's attention shifted like a tide, 40 faces turning toward the forgotten daughter standing at the table's edge. What are you doing? Ivy's voice pitched high, her composure cracking. I looked directly at my father. Accepting my inheritance, just not the one you planned. I connected my iPad to the room's presentation system, replacing my father's architectural dreams with Cinderline's forensic analysis. The web of shell companies bloomed across the screen like a virus under a microscope. Red lines connected Harrison's 7 companies to Pierce and Alder, each transaction tagged with dates, amounts, and invoice numbers. This is a mapping of systematic procurement fraud, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. Over 3 years, Pierce and Alder has inflated costs on city contracts by an average of 37%, billing the excess through shell companies owned by Harrison Whitfield. I clicked to the next slide. The overbilling totals $43 million. This is absurd. Harrison stood, his face flushing dark. You can't just P.O. Box 1147. I interrupted. Brennan Associates, Clearfield Consulting, Meridian Partners all registered to the same box in a strip mall on Thorndale, a strip mall owned by Pierce and Alder, leased to companies owned by you. I clicked again. Here are the signature cards, your name on every one. My father's hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. Natalie, whatever you think you're doing. I'm exercising my rights as the new controlling creditor of Pierce and Alder. I held up the Westridge document. As of 8:15 tonight, Rowan Capital, my company, has the right to acquire your $800 million in construction loans due to covenant breach. Material adverse change clause, triggered by evidence of systematic fraud affecting more than 5% of revenue. You don't have $800 million? Ivy laughed, shrill and desperate. I don't need it. I just need to prove breach, which triggers immediate default. Westridge has to call the loan. And guess who has first right of acquisition at 30 cents on the dollar? I clicked to the loan documents. The debt service coverage ratio also dropped below 1.2 last quarter. You hit it with the consulting fees. But those are fraudulent. Remove them, and you've been in breach for 6 months. The room erupted. Board members pushed back from tables, phones appearing in hands. Someone near the door was already on a call with their lawyer. My mother sat frozen, her champagne glass tilted dangerously. There's more, I continued, clicking to show Ivy's subsidiary companies. Ivy Pierce, through 3 entities, received $2.3 million in marketing consultancy fees. No actual marketing was performed. The money traced directly to personal accounts used for, I clicked again, wedding expenses, a condo in Lincoln Park, and a yacht timeshare in Miami. Ivy's perfect composure shattered. You vindictive little. I'm vindictive, I laughed, the sound sharp as winter air. You've been stealing while playing the perfect daughter. Every time Mom told me to be more like you were committing felonies. Jonathan Park from Hartwell stood up, term sheet in hand. Ms. Pierce, Ms. Natalie Pierce. Hartwell Equity is prepared to move forward with $15 million Series A funding for Cinderline Analytics. Valuation at $40 million. Your algorithm has identified over $60 million in recoverable fraud for our portfolio companies. $15 million, my father's voice cracked. For what some software that uncovered your entire criminal enterprise, I replied. Software that 18 insurance companies and 43 municipalities are now using. Software I built while you thought I was failing at life. I clicked to my final slide, the offer terms. Here's the deal. Ivy resigns immediately from all positions, signs a full cooperation agreement with authorities, and repays the stolen funds. Harrison does the same. In exchange, I don't forward this file to the FBI tonight. Gregory and Vivian Pierce, you keep the Lakefield house and enough funds to maintain your lifestyle. All Pierce and Alder employees keep their jobs with full benefits. But I'm installing new management, subject to federal monitoring for 18 months. And finally, 30% of all profits from existing developments transfer to the Cinderline Fellowship, a fund for forensic accounting training and fraud prevention in public procurement. You can't do this, my father said, but his voice had lost its command. I can, and I am. You have 10 minutes to decide. After that, I call the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're particularly interested in the federal contracts you've tainted. Harrison lunged toward me, but Roberto and 2 waiters stepped forward. Sir, I need you to remain seated, Roberto said calmly. How long? My mother whispered, mascara streaming. How long have you been planning this? Since my 16th birthday? I replied. When you gave my celebration to Ivy's engagement, you told me to be realistic about my place in the world. This is me being realistic. My place isn't at the edge of your table. It's at the head of mine. The room held its breath. My father looked at his lawyer, who was frantically scrolling through documents on his phone, face pale. The board members had formed a cluster near the door, their whispered conversations carrying notes of panic. 5 minutes, I announced, checking my phone. Marla, my attorney, is standing by with either cooperation agreements or federal subpoenas. Your choice. The silence stretched like a held breath until Harrison cracked first. What's P.O. Box 1147? He asked Ivy, his voice thin with panic. I don't. Ivy started, then stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's where your love letters arrive, I said quietly, along with $43 million in fraudulent invoices. My father's lawyer approached the podium, phone in hand. Gregory, they're right. The covenant breach is bulletproof. If this goes federal, we're looking at RICO charges, asset forfeiture, 20 years minimum. 3 minutes, I announced. My mother stood abruptly, champagne glass shattering on the floor. You ungrateful after everything we gave you. You gave me nothing, I said, meeting her gaze. Every birthday forgotten, every achievement dismissed, every be realistic, Natalie carved away another piece of who I might have been. But you taught me something valuable: how to be invisible, how to watch, how to wait. Gregory Pierce, the man who'd built an empire from a single property, looked at his golden daughter, then at me, the forgotten one. The fellowship fund, he said hoarsely. 30% is excessive. 35% if you keep negotiating, I replied. Marla entered with perfect timing, briefcase in hand, documents already prepared. Mr. Pierce, Mrs. Pierce, these cooperation agreements are one-time offers. Sign now, or we proceed with federal filing. Ivy's hands shook as she reached for the pen. I was supposed to have everything, she whispered. You did have everything, I replied. That was the problem. One by one, they signed. Harrison, trying to salvage dignity. Ivy, tears destroying her perfect makeup. My mother, mouth pressed into a bitter line. And finally, my father, each signature a transfer of power from the empire he'd built to the daughter he'd never seen coming. The transition team arrives Monday, I said, collecting the signed documents. Roberto, you can serve the main course now. I'm not hungry, Ivy spat, standing to leave. Then go, I said. But the Riverview penthouse gets listed tomorrow, the Lincoln Park condo too. Fraud proceeds get returned, not relocated. The room emptied in stages, board members fleeing potential association, Harrison's family distancing themselves from scandal, city officials already on phones with damage control teams. Within 10 minutes, only my immediate family remained, scattered across the private dining room like survivors of a bombing. My father stared at the forensic report still glowing on the screen. How did you learn all this? We never taught you. Exactly. I interrupted. You never taught me anything. So I taught myself. Every pattern you ignored, every document you thought I was too stupid to understand, every conversation you had while I was invisible in the room, I absorbed it all, built my own language for it, turned my disabilities into abilities you couldn't recognize. Jonathan Park returned with the signed Hartwell documents and a bottle of champagne. To Cinderline Analytics, he said, popping the cork, and to the most elegant corporate assassination I've ever witnessed. I accepted a glass but didn't drink. There was no joy in this victory, only the cold satisfaction of balance restored. My mother stood to leave, pausing at my shoulder. I suppose you're proud of yourself, she said. No, I replied honestly. I'm just done being ashamed of myself. She left without another word, followed by my father who couldn't meet my eyes. Ivy lingered at the door, mascara streaked and diminished. Why? She asked. You could have just left, started fresh somewhere else. With what money, what connections, what family support? I shook my head. You got everything. Ivy, the love, the opportunities, the assumption of success. I got the leftovers and learned to make them into something you never saw coming. She left, and I was alone in the copper-tinted room with the remnants of their celebration abandoned champagne, cooling duck confit, architectural dreams that would never be built. Roberto approached quietly. The reporter from the Tribune is here, he said. The one you asked me to call at 8:30. Send them in, I said, straightening my dress. The story breaks tomorrow. Pierce and Alder under new management. Cinderline Analytics preventing municipal fraud. The Cinderline Fellowship launching with 30% of recovered funds. I looked at the presentation screen one last time. My family's empire reduced to evidence slides and forensic proof. They'd given me nothing but neglect and dismissal, teaching me I was worthless, practical, forgettable. They were wrong about two of those things, but practical. That lesson I kept. Practical enough to know that revenge isn't a dish best served cold, it's best served with documentation, delivered at exactly 8:20 on a Thursday night. with every receipt in order. My phone buzzed. Marla. FBI wants to discuss a federal contract for Cinderline. 9 figures. I smiled, finally tasting the champagne. It was expensive, charged to Pierce and Alder's account. The last thing they'd ever pay for, and the first thing that was truly mine. Ms. Pierce, the reporter called from the doorway. I understand you have a story about corporate fraud and family business. I have something better, I replied, turning to face my future. I have the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of revenge and justice resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Natalie's position? Let me know in the comments.